The morning air on Aries 9 carried a strange clarity, almost too clean, as if the night had been scrubbed of anything human. The promenade glass under Evan Cad's boots was slick with dew, the surface mirroring fern towers that swayed in the light breeze and banners that rippled with the shift of high-altitude winds. Evan's stride was measured, shoulders squared, back straight, eyes flicking with practiced ease from cover to exit to passerby. He had not shaken the old habits count every head in range, note where shadows pooled, never walk without knowing 3 ways out. His slate-gray shirt hung loose at the sleeves. Trousers tucked into bridge boots scuffed from years of service. And the satchel at his hip gave a faint clink with every step, spice vials rattling in muted rhythm. He was not wandering. He was tracking. His dog, Kira, had slipped leash the night before, a thing he had done before, but never without returning by dawn. Today the loft had stayed quiet, the hammock quarters empty, the water dish untouched. And so Evan had studied the dew trails outside his terrace, bent low to read the paw prints pressed into slick glass, and followed them into the waking city. The hum of the towers was steady, water lines pulsing faintly through the translucent trunks. But underneath came something sharper, lighter, the high sound of laughter. It cut against the ordered silence like a knife. Evan slowed, shifting his weight against the rail, hand brushing the cool pane, his eyes narrowing as he followed the sound around a fern cluster. Laughter again, bright, unguarded, and then the sight struck him before he fully registered it. His chest tightened. Kira barreled across the glass span, tail high, tongue lolling, a strip of colored ribbon flapping from his jaws as if it were a trophy. Behind him raced 2 figures, small, feet slapping the dew-slick surface, voices spilling unrestrained into the dawn air. 2 girls' children. Their skin was coral pink, curls black with a faint charcoal sheen, freckles that shimmered faintly along collarbones, as though each breath sparked bioluminescent dots into light. They could not have been more than 6, maybe younger. One had already lost a sandal, barefoot flashing wet against the glass, but neither seemed to care. They laughed like it was the only good thing they'd been given all week. Relief hit first, sharp and undeniable. Kira was alive, unharmed, happy, but the feeling didn't last. A different weight pulled into Evan's stomach, heavier than worry for a stray hound. Children did not belong here at this hour, unsupervised on a high promenade. The guild laws were clear. No minors without guardians, especially those with hybrid marks. Every head would turn at the sight if they chose to look, and already Evan felt the hair rise at the back of his neck with the sense of eyes hiding behind polite silence. He whistled once, a clean note carried through the dew mist. Kira stopped mid-turn, tail still wagging, and padded back with the ribbon still caught in his jaws. Evan dropped to one knee, slid 2 fingers into the dog's collar, and spoke low and steady, not scolding but reassuring, a voice meant to calm more than command. His gaze lifted then, falling squarely on the girls, their laughter tapering into silence as they stared back. Relief had been easy. What came next would not. Why were these children alone, running free when the city's rules would condemn their presence as scandal? Evan felt the question form in his chest before he spoke a word. The guild's silence was always dangerous. And already the morning promised more than a lost dog found. Evan held Kira close for a moment, steadying the dog's breathing against his paw, but his eyes stayed fixed on the girls. The older one slowed first, her grin fading into something thinner, watchful, as if she were measuring how much to trust. The younger stayed behind her, curls sticking damp against her cheek, one hand clutching the edge of her tunic. "Where's your mother?" Evan asked, his tone even but carrying an edge of authority. The words seemed to still the air. The older girl, Tavy, he would learn, lifted her chin with a stubbornness that looked older than her small frame. They took her, she said, and though her voice trembled, the defiance underneath made it firm. Evan's chest tightened again. "Who took her?" he asked. The answer came quickly, clipped like something practiced. "The Scent Guild?" She stood straighter, as if daring him to challenge the words. He didn't. Instead, he exhaled through his nose, low, controlled, not surprise, but frustration. He had heard of cases like this. No cells on Ares 9, no bars, just the guild's quiet walls and something they called purity lodging. Evan's eyes flicked around the promenade, taking in the scene with one sweep. A pair of gardeners tending fern troughs across the span. A street crier shouldering a silver crate. One guild novice in white robes, watching too long. Evan shifted instinctively, placing himself between the girls and the drop edge, his stance casual enough not to draw attention, but exact enough to shield them. "What rules?" he asked, keeping his voice level. The younger girl whispered then, so soft the wind nearly swallowed her words. She mixed her own oil. She said, "Smell me." Then the elder wrote it down. They took her to the scent house. The name landed with a weight heavier than any child should carry. Evan studied the younger one, Eilini, her eyes wide, her voice almost swallowed by fear. The way she said it was not rehearsed. It was memory. His jaw tightened. He knew the guild prided itself on order, not compassion, and the people here had perfected the art of looking away. But 2 children sleeping in vent gardens? That was not order. That was neglect dressed up as silence. He straightened, clipped Kira's leash into place, and asked the only question that mattered next. "You hungry?" The girls glanced at each other. Tavy's lips pressed into a line, suspicious, calculating. Eilini blurted out a small, desperate yes, before she could stop herself. Evan nodded once. "Good, we fixed that first." He turned, walking at a steady, unhurried pace toward the corner cafe, Kira pacing at his side. The girls followed, instinctively drifting to his right, within arm's reach, as though even they knew the safest place was inside his shadow. Eyes tracked them as they passed. Quick glances, sudden silences, the soft withdrawal of strangers who pretended not to notice. That, more than anything, was what ground against Evan's nerves, the enforced indifference of a city that measured its pride by what it refused to acknowledge. Inside the cafe, warmth hit like a balm. The smell of yeast, sugar, and steam wrapped the space, alive with the hiss of milk frothers and the clink of cups. Evan ordered without hesitation. 2 storm foam milks for the girls, a plate of Zyron berry rounds crackling with sugar crust, and a furlan seed coffee for himself. He shrugged off his weather cloak and settled it over Eilini's shoulders. The fabric nearly swallowed her, but her shivering eased. At their table by the window, Kira curled at their feet, tail thumping gently. As though he had claimed them already, Evan sat with his back angled toward the door, eyes scanning out of habit, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "You too know Kira," he said. Eilini stroked the dog's ear with careful fingers. "He found us," she whispered. Evan studied the hound, the instinct that had carried him straight to children abandoned on a promenade. Finder of mead, as his old squad used to call dogs like this. He didn't say it aloud. Instead, he watched the girls tear into berry rounds, too fast, until he said, "Slow." They straightened instantly, chewing carefully, as if afraid to waste what they had been given. "Names?" Evan asked, calm but expectant. The older raised her chin. "Tavy," the younger whispered again. "Eilini." Evan nodded once. "I'm Evan. This is Kira." He let the silence stretch, then asked the question he already knew would matter most. "Where's your home?" Tavy's lips pressed tighter, her eyes flaring with something between pride and fear. "With her. With our mother." Evan leaned back, studying the two of them in the cafe's gentle light. The path was already clear. The guild would not release Nia without a bond host. He had filed minor claims before, knew the law most citizens forgot existed, but he had never used it for something this serious. Still, the choice was already carved. He glanced at the girls, their eyes flicking between hunger and hope. Eileen's voice came again, small but sharp with need. "You won't leave us here, right?" Evan didn't hesitate. No. The word carried the weight of a promise he knew he couldn't take back. It settled like iron in his chest, locking into place. He had come looking for a lost dog. Instead, he had found two children the city refused to see. And now, whether he liked it or not, they were his responsibility. Evan led them from the cafe with an unhurried stride, Kira tugging lightly at the leash, but matching his rhythm as though he understood the weight of the moment. The girls stayed tucked close to his side, Eileen half hidden in the weather cloak, Tavy's jaw set with a defiance that was already too old for her years. The promenade hummed with the morning's commerce vendors setting up stalls, guild banners snapping crisp in the breeze, glass corridors polished to shine, but every step felt like a stage. Eyes turned toward them, lingered, and then slid away again in silence. That silence pressed harder than stares. Evan kept his shoulders square, his face unreadable, but inside his pulse ran quick. He knew what the watchers saw. A man with two hybrid children trailing after him. A scene the laws of Ares 9 pretended not to permit. The city prided itself on order, not compassion, and that order thrived on the fiction of indifference. At the terrace loft, he scanned his wrist chip, and the glass panel slid open with a muted chime. The girls hesitated at the threshold, their bare feet damp from the dew, and for a second he realized no one had asked them inside anywhere since their mother was taken. "Go on," he said, his tone steady, motioning with one hand. "You're safe here." Eileenii entered first, still wrapped in his cloak, leaving small wet prints across the polished floor. Tavy followed slower, her eyes sharp, cataloging the space with a suspicion that mirrored the way he once assessed outposts. Evan let them look. The loft wasn't grand, but it was lived-in-air harps, humming faintly with the wind on the terrace rail, racks of herbs drying by the counter, specimen jars glinting where the morning sun caught the glass. Two hammocks hung rolled against the far wall, shells stacked neatly beside folded blankets. To the girls it must have looked like abundance compared to a night spent in a vent garden. Kira padded inside ahead of them, circling once before curling up near the hammocks. Laying his head across his paws as though to mark the space theirs, Eileenii dropped to her knees, burying her face in the dog's side with a muffled laugh that cracked into something closer to relief. Tavy stayed upright, her shoulders tight, but when Evan crouched to meet her eyes, he saw the exhaustion swimming just under her guarded expression. "You'll stay here until I bring your mother back," he said, the words calm, plain. "Do you understand?" She frowned at him, as if testing whether he meant it. "What if the guild says no?" she asked. Evan reached for his satchel, pulled out his slate, and tapped the screen until a clause illuminated in stark text. "They can't. There's a law most people forget," he said, turning it so she could read. "A bond host can claim responsibility. Once it's filed, it doesn't matter what anyone whispers. It's on record." Tavy's eyes flicked over the words, then back to him, searching for the catch. He didn't give her one. After a long breath, she gave a small nod and edged closer to her sister. Evan stood, stripped the satchel from his shoulder, and washed his hands at the sink. From the corner of his eye, he saw Eileenii watching every move like a child, hungry for proof that this wasn't a dream. He began pulling food from storage maroon fish fillets, dusted with Sorac citrus, a small pouch of sea grain, a bundle of Drax mushrooms. He set a pan on the burner and let the oil hiss as the first slice of fish hit the heat. The smell spread warm across the loft, filling spaces words couldn't. He set plates at the low table, sliding food toward them without ceremony. The girls ate fast at first, hands darting, then slowed under his steady gaze. Only after the plates were nearly clear did Eileen's small voice cut the silence. Why did they take her for a smell? Evan put down his cup of seed coffee, meeting her eyes with a calm that didn't hide the truth. The guild controls what scents people can wear in public. They call it respect between species. Your mother made her own oil. An elder didn't like it. That's all it takes. Tavy slammed her chopsticks down with a sharp clack. That's not dangerous, she said, her voice fierce, almost shaking. No, Evan agreed. But humiliation here is treated like danger. That's why I'll go to the scent house and file the bond. Once it's signed, she walks free. The explanation hung heavy for a moment, but he saw the way it eased something in Tavy's shoulders, the way Eileen's lips parted as if daring to believe. He cleared the plates, unrolled the hammocks, and showed them how to climb in. Eilene curled against the fabric immediately, Kira's chin pressed over her feet like a silent guard. Tavy hesitated, half upright, eyes still locked on him. Will you be back before dark? She asked. Yes, Evan said without pause, clipping his satchel shut and slinging it across his shoulder again. He moved to the door and let the lock cycle. It seals from the inside. Don't open it for anyone. Not even me. Only for her. The surprise on Tavy's face was brief, but telling respect blooming in the crack left behind by fear. She nodded once, almost approving. Evan paused at the rail before leaving, his gaze flicking back to the two small shapes in their hammocks, one already slipping into sleep, the other still watching him carefully. The weight of responsibility pressed harder than any scout pack he had ever carried, but the choice was already made. He had followed Kira's trail to two children left behind by silence, and now their lives balanced on a technicality buried in the law. He stepped out into the sunlight, jaw set, knowing the next step would be harder than any patrol route. The path was clear. Walk into the scent house and bring their mother home. The walk to the scent house carried a weight Evan felt in every measured step. Ares 9 gleamed immaculate that morning, as though the city itself conspired to conceal its fractures. Glass bridges polished until they caught the sky. Banners stretched taut along railings, water lines humming like a constant heartbeat within the fern towers. Citizens moved around him and practiced rhythm in different glances, polite postures, feet quick to avoid contact, but the silence under their breath carried judgment. They knew where he was headed. No one walked toward the alabaster spire without purpose. His boots struck the glass steady, his satchel brushing his hip, his posture a study in unhurried resolve, though beneath the surface his pulse kept to a soldier's cadence. He had promised two small children a mother restored, and that meant there was no turning back. The scent house loomed above the promenade, its white surface veined with translucent panels etched in guild symbology. Steam rose from vents carved into its face, carrying threads of fragrance floral, medicinal, metallic, that merged into a strange, hollow neutrality. Evan disliked it instantly. Order had a smell here, one that scrubbed away individuality until nothing distinct remained. He mounted the steps, passing between glass panels inscribed with simplified laws of fragrance, pictograms any species could interpret. They confirmed what he already knew. Nia hadn't broken a safety law, only a custom. That was enough to strip her of dignity. He stepped through the main doors into light that was almost blinding, the white tiles reflecting harsh against the pupils, and forced himself not to squint. A clerk in pale robes approached. Slate in hand, her expression set in lines of practiced composure. "State your purpose," she intoned, though her eyes lingered on his plain utility clothes, his boots damp with dew. Evan held up his own slate without hesitation. "Bond host claim," he said, voice steady. He tapped the entry he had prepared, the interspecies courtesy law, flickering in precise text. The clerk's eyes narrowed as she scanned it. Few ever used this clause. Most either lacked the will or the nerve. "You understand the responsibility?" she asked. "Yes," Evan answered. "I sign for her conduct. She leaves under my roof." The clerk's lips parted to form another objection, some ritual warning about assumption and consequence. But Evan cut her off before she could shape the words. "I don't care what they assume. Is she here?" For a moment, the woman hesitated, then inclined her head and gestured for him to follow. They passed down a corridor where thin curtains of steam hung like barriers, each veil dimming the view into quiet chambers beyond. Through the mist, he glimpsed figures seated alone, heads bowed, hands folded, eyes blank. Some whispered, some stared into nothing. He kept his gaze forward, shoulders locked. He had no use for pity. At the end of the hall, the clerk drew aside a heavier curtain, and Evan stepped into a chamber that seemed almost designed for spectacle. Translucent panels framed the space, droplets of condensation beating down the surface's dot. She was there. Nia stood in the center, wrapped in a translucent sea mist robe that clung to the lines of her shoulders, damp with confinement steam. Beads of water slid down her coral pink skin, catching in the copper thread braided through her dark hair. Her eyes, sharp but ringed with exhaustion, lifted when she heard the curtain shift. For a heartbeat she studied him, her pupils narrowing, widening, measuring. "You're the man with the dog," she said at last, her voice steady, though her fingers twisted the robe's edge. Evan's reply came calm, almost gentle. "And 2 breakfast thieves," he said. "They're at my place now, safe." He saw her expression falter then, relief sparking before it folded quickly back into restraint. "If I accept your bond," she said slowly, "they'll say I traded safety for a man's scent." The shame in her words was raw, but so was the pride behind them. Evan didn't flinch. "They can say it," he answered, his tone low and even. "What matters is you're home with them." Silence stretched, long enough that the sound of steam dripping from the panels filled the space. She studied him, his squared shoulders, his eyes fixed on the exit instead of her body, the absence of hesitation. He could see the battle in her, the weight of humiliation against the pull of 2 daughters waiting. Behind them, the clerk cleared her throat, impatience bleeding through formality. "Do you consent to this bond, Nia?" Her gaze flicked once more to Evan, searching for the trap, then something in her shoulders eased. "Yes," she said. The clerk recorded it quickly, stylus scratching across the slate. "Then she leaves in your custody," she declared. Evan nodded, stepping aside to give Nia room. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't guide her. He simply shifted his body so his shadow fell slightly ahead of hers, a quiet guard as she walked forward. She passed through the steam veil without falter, but he caught the tremor in her fingers, the subtle wobble of exhaustion she refused to show. Outside, the air felt different, colder, sharper. People along the bridge stopped at once, whispers carrying low as they saw her emerge at his side, robe damp, shin lifted, each step a challenge to shame. Evan did not break stride, his posture unyielding as they crossed the promenade together. At one point, her voice came quiet, almost breaking against the hum of turbines overhead. "Why are you doing this?" "You don't know me." Evan's eyes stayed forward, his jaw set. "Because your girls asked me not to leave them alone. That's reason enough." She said nothing, but she walked closer, not touching, but near. And in the glass reflection of the promenade rail, Evan saw what mattered. For the first time since she had been taken, she was walking free dot by the time they reached his terrace loft. The glass had warmed under the midday sun, turning the promenade into a mirror of banners and fern towers that shimmered in the light. Evan keyed the door, and the panel slid open to reveal two small shapes pressed against the glass from inside. The girls burst through before he could speak, bare feet slapping against the polished floor as they collided with their mother. Eilini threw herself into Nia's robe, sobbing openly, while Tavy hesitated for half a beat, jaw trembling, then folded into the embrace with a force that knocked their mother back a step. Nia's arms closed around them with desperate strength, laughter spilling out only to break halfway into tears. The sight pressed something deep inside Evan's chest, but he didn't move closer. He stayed by the door, posture calm, gaze steady, letting them have the moment without interference. For the first time in days, the family was whole. But he knew the city's eyes hadn't turned away. When Nia finally lifted her head, her gaze caught on the folded slate linen shirt laid across the chair by the wall. Evan spoke before she could misinterpret, his voice level, carrying no weight but clarity. "Showers are warm. That shirt's there until you choose your own." Her fingers tightened around the robe, pride warring with exhaustion, but then she looked at her daughter's Eilini, still clinging to her side. Tavy standing guard with bright, sharp eyes, and she gave a single nod. She moved into the washroom with her chin high, leaving damp footprints behind her. Evan turned to the counter without comment, pulling food from storage, letting the rhythm of preparation speak louder than words. The loft filled with sound and scent. Oil hissed as reef bird breast touched the pan. Citrus zest flared sharp in the air. Drax mushrooms seared with driftwood oil until the edges curled golden. He set sea grain steaming, brushed a strip of Tadebor shoulder with charred vine pots, laid out bowls with measured precision. The girls drifted to the low table, restless but calmer, their eyes following every movement. Eilini leaned against Kira, who had planted himself like a sentinel, while Tavy kept sneaking glances toward the door, as though daring herself to trust. When the washroom finally opened, Nia emerged in the slate shirt, hair damp and falling dark around her face, collar loose at the throat. The girl's eyes widened at the sight of her in something unmarked by confinement, and she gave them a small smile that steadied her shoulders. She took a seat without asking, folding one leg beneath her, and accepted the plate Evan slid toward her dot. They ate together in a quiet rhythm. The girls tore into the mushrooms first, mouths quick, then slowed when Evan gave them the same quiet command as before, slow. Nia tasted with restraint, assessing rather than indulging, and when she set her chopsticks down, she said simply, "Balanced, clean, not overdone." It wasn't praise. It was judgment, a craftswoman's assessment. For Evan, it was enough. She was engaging again, not retreating into silence. After the dishes were cleared, he unrolled his mat near the door as always, but Nia paused by the hammocks, hesitation flickering across her features as she tried to decide where she belonged. Evan caught her uncertainty and said, in the same calm tone as before, "You're not a guest. Sleep where you want." She nodded once and climbed in beside her daughters, curling around them as though reclaiming what the guild had tried to take. Night came with lantern ribbons strung across the terrace, their light flickering against glass and stone. Evan stood close enough to be counted as part of the scene, but far enough to let Nia lead. Together, they prepared the reconciliation meal, a public ritual as old as the guild itself. Reef stag loin roasted low, Tadebor shoulder set to slow char, mushrooms folded into sea grain, siren porridge brulee, waiting with its golden sugar crust. The girls worked too Tavy fussing with the lantern ribbons, Eilini peeling fruit skins and sneaking slices to Kira when she thought no one watched. By evening, the air was alive with the layered scents of smoke, citrus, and oil, drifting down to the public garden below. Neighbors gathered, first curious, then cautious, and finally in clusters, watching with folded arms and quiet whispers. Among them stood the elder who had written Nia's infraction, stiff and tight-lipped, his robes immaculate as though dignity were armor. When Nia stepped onto the terrace, sea silk wrap knotted at her hip, her voice carried across the hush. "I crossed her comfort with my scent," she declared. "I cross it now with food. If it tastes arrogant, walk away." She did not bow. She did not plead. She served. Evan moved beside her, silent but efficient, passing plates in steady rhythm. The crowd ate first with caution, then with hunger, whispers softening into murmurs of satisfaction. Even the mocking vendor's shoulders eased as flavor claimed his scowl. At last the elder tasted, and after a long pause, inclined his head. "Bond host," he said aloud, his voice brittle but clear. "Your household carries itself with respect. The guild withdraws its censure." There was no applause, no cheer, only a subtle release of tension, like the city exhaling after holding its breath as the crowd dispersed. Evan leaned closer, voice low enough only she could hear. "It worked. They'll stop watching so hard." Nia didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed on her daughters, chasing Kira through the lanterns, laughter ringing high in the night air. When she finally turned, her expression was different, not relief, not suspicion, but something steadier. "You've done more than I asked," she said softly. "More than I expected." Evan's reply was plain. "I didn't do it alone." She didn't respond with words. Instead, her hand brushed against his arm, brief but deliberate, before she stepped back toward the girls. Lantern light shimmered against her damp hair as the ribbons above swayed. For the first time since her confinement, she did not carry shame on her shoulders. She carried presence. And Evan, steady at her side, knew the household had crossed a threshold. They were no longer surviving on silence. They were claiming a place the guild could no longer deny. The terrace had gone quiet after the crowd dispersed, the lantern ribbons still rattling softly in the high-altitude wind. Evan gathered dishes with steady hands, rinsing them beneath the narrow water stream, his movements measured, precise, as if discipline itself could anchor the space. Nia dried each plate in silence, her daughters curled in hammocks behind them, Kira sprawled at their feet like a sentinel finally at rest. The loft smelled faintly of citrus smoke and roasted to Deborah's shoulder, traces of the reconciliation meal that had reshaped their standing in a single night. For a while neither spoke. The quiet was not heavy, but it was charged, carrying the awareness of what had been risked, what had been won. Nia glanced at him over the rim of the last plate, studying the line of his shoulders, the calm steadiness in the way he worked. He had not flinched when the city watched her. He had not stepped back when whispers sharpened into judgment. And now, for the first time since she had been taken, she felt the shame inside her loosen its hold. "You didn't falter when they stared at me," she said finally, her voice low, almost reluctant. Evan set the plate down, shook his hands dry. "They were waiting for you to falter," he said plainly. "I wasn't going to give them that." She tilted her head, studying him as if the simplicity itself was a kind of defiance. "You speak like it's easy." He looked at her then, calm and unblinking. "It is. You did the work. I just kept the space clear." Nia set the towel aside, the faint scent of oil still clinging to her skin, a reminder of both craft and accusation. She moved toward the terrace rail, where the city stretched below them in lines of light, turbines humming like a pulse under glass. Evan joined her, not too near, not distant, his presence steady as the lantern swayed above. "They'll talk," she murmured, her hands tightening on the rail. "They always do." "Let them," he replied without hesitation. "This household isn't theirs." The words landed heavy, settling in her chest like something she had wanted to hear, but had not dared expect. She breathed out slowly, her pride still raw, but steadied by his certainty. He didn't press closer, didn't claim space that wasn't his. But she felt his steadiness, an anchor against the tremor in her hands. For a moment, she let herself lean into it, not in surrender, but in recognition. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. His brow arched slightly. "What did you expect?" She looked at him directly now, her eyes sharp even in the dim light. "A man who'd remind me I owed him." Evan shook his head once. "I don't trade in debt. I do what needs doing. That's enough." She let the silence stretch, then reached out with deliberate restraint, her fingers brushing his forearm before resting briefly against his collar. His heartbeat was steady beneath her touch, unhurried, unclaimed. He didn't move, didn't reach for more, simply allowed the choice to belong to her. The air between them shifted, charged with something neither had spoken, but both felt. Her hand lingered, then slipped away, but the warmth remained. She turned, eyes glancing toward the hammocks, where her daughters slept knotted together in fabric, Kira's head draped protectively over their legs. The sight steadied her more than any law, more than any guild decree. For the first time in days, she did not feel like a prisoner waiting for judgment. She felt like a woman standing in her own space. Later, as Evan unrolled his mat near the door, she paused, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to sleep there anymore," she said. "The danger isn't outside." His answer was simple, steady, the same as always. "I'll sleep here until you ask me not to." She held his gaze for a long breath, then nodded and climbed into the hammock beside her daughters. The lanterns flickered soft across the glass, the hum of turbines underscoring the silence that followed. It was not the silence of shame. It was the silence of safety. Dawn spilled pale light across the terrace, glinting on the rails like 1,000 scattered coins. Evan was already awake, rolling his mat neatly, setting water to boil, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man used to barracks mornings. The girls stirred slowly, wild-haired and heavy with sleep, voices small with laughter as Kira nudged them awake. Nia rose last, blinking against the sunlight, her body adjusting to the absence of confinement steam. She wore the linen shirt still, its hem brushing her thighs, hair loose around her shoulders. She paused in the doorway, watching as Evan sliced reef stag medallions with careful precision, his sleeves rolled to his forearms, the rhythm of his work deliberate, unhurried. For a long moment, she only stood there, feeling the loft as more than refuge, feeling it as home. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "You filed the bond. You walked me out. But the guild will still watch." Evan set the blade down, met her eyes without wavering. "I know. That's why we host a meal. Not for forgiveness. For respect." She studied him, then nodded once, decisive. "Then we do it right." And in that moment, under the morning light of Ares 9, the unspoken truth settled between them. They had crossed from survival into something else, something chosen. The whispers outside would continue, but inside the loft, the bond was not of law or debt. It was of decision, of presence, of a household quietly declaring itself whole.